Okay, so by this point, you should be pretty comfortable with the basic query editing tools, your date tools and text tools and number tools. And for the most part, they've all been pretty straightforward and pretty intuitive, but there are some pretty interesting, maybe not so intuitive tools that are available within the query editor. And one thing that I want to cover now is this idea of pivoting and unpivoting a table. So the way I describe it, pivoting is just a fancy way to describe the process of turning distinct row values into columns, which is called pivoting, or turning columns into rows, which is called unpivoting. Now, it sounds pretty simple on the surface, but it's actually a little bit tricky to get the hang of. Well, at least it was for me. And I'm a visual learner, and what I'm about to show you is what finally caused it to click for me. So imagine you've got this simple table. You've got dates in the first column, followed by product categories, then region, and quantities sold. If we were to select the region and quantities sold columns, and then pivot this table, we would essentially take the region in each row and turn it into its own column. So instead of having a row for North region, we would have a column, and the same applies for Central and South regions too. So what we've basically done here is flip that table from a vertical format up into a horizontal format. We've turned rows into columns. Now on the flip side, if we started out with the table in that horizontal format and we selected the regions in the first row, we could unpivot to transform it into that vertical form. Now in other words, we're taking those regions, which had been columns, and transform them into rows. So my little mental tip here is that I imagine that the table is kind of like on a hinge in that upper left-hand corner. Pivoting is like rotating it up from vertical to horizontal, and unpivoting is like rotating down from horizontal to vertical. Now, one thing to note here, there's actually another tool in the query editor called transpose, and that works in a really similar way. But the difference is that it doesn't recognize unique values. So if you're dealing with a table like the one we're looking at here, where we have duplicate dates and quantities, pivoting and transposing would yield very different results. So one way to think about that is that transpose is kind of clunky. It's kind of like using brute force. It just takes an entire table and flips it up on its side, right? So you would have duplicates for each date and category and so on and so forth. So I actually have a little demo file here that I'm going to show you because you really do have to see this happening in real time in order to kind of understand and grasp what's going on. So let's jump over to Power BI and we'll show you what this looks like. All right, so we're going to go back up and we are going to grab a new data set. And there is a data set called Product Category Sales Unpivot Demo. And you can open this one to kind of follow along and play around with the data set on your own if you're so inclined. All right, we get our preview and we'll add this in. Again, for the sake of the demo, we don't really need to update the name or data types or anything like that. If there's any errors here, you could address those, but everything should be good to go. All right, so you can see here, we're actually starting off with this table pivoted. And let's say that we were given this table by a team of sales reps that had been collecting sales data for each of their regions by product and date, and they combined all of their work into a single data set, right? And they give it to you and they say, hey, we need some help with some data visualization here, and we really want to be able to filter all of our sales by date and product and region. And the way that this data set's configured, it doesn't make that very easy to add a region filter. So as an analyst, as someone who needs to take this data and interpret it and analyze it and explore it, this type of table format can lead to a bunch of different headaches. And really what we're looking for here is a rectangular table with each dimension or metric as its own column and each observation as a row. So ideally what we're looking for here is to transform this whole table into a 4-column table that contains date, product category, a column for region, and then another column for my sales quantity. Once we get it in that format, that would give me a form that I could then plug into my data model and analyze in any way that I choose. So let's take a look at some of these pivoting and unpivoting tools to see if they can help us. All right, so because we're starting in this pivoted mode, what we want to do is we want to unpivot these columns, right? So I'm going to select my different regions here, and we'll come up to transform, and you can see we have unpivot. We've got a few options here: unpivot columns, unpivot other columns, unpivot only selected columns. And because we've selected the columns we want to unpivot, we'll click unpivot columns, right? And what this does is it creates an attribute column and then a value column, right? So from here, we could name this region, right? And this could be, quantity sold. So very quickly, we've been able to get our data set in a format that lends itself a lot better to being analyzed. Now we could go back to the pivoted version. All right, so we select our two columns. We'll come up here to pivot. And from our dialog, use the names in the column region to create new columns. Our value column is our quantity sold. So we're good there. We'll click OK, right? And then we're back to that pivoted version of the table. So again, pretty straightforward demo here when you've got a table that contains columns like this and you need to get it into a little bit better of a format. What we can do here is we can delete these last applied steps here to return the table back to its original format. Right? And the last thing that I want to show you here is that the transpose option that we talked about in the slides here, right? Again, like that's this brute force option. You take a look at our rows here, right? We've got 4 different rows for July 1st. We've got 4 different rows for July 2nd. And what happens is it retains everything. It doesn't group it. So if we click transpose, you can see here that we've got 4 columns for July 1st, right? For bike, components, clothing, accessories. Right? If we scroll over, we've got 4 rows for the 2nd. Again, bike, component, clothing, accessories. So again, using transpose in this case doesn't make sense because again, it's going to split these all into their own columns. And again, that's not the desired state that we're looking for. All right, so there you have it. That's your demo on pivoting and unpivoting a data set.